For centuries, warriors like Battal Gazi had tested the edges of Byzantine Anatolia, raid by raid, siege by siege. But it took one single day to change everything. In the year 1071, near a fortress called Manzikert in eastern Anatolia, two armies prepared to decide the fate of an entire region. On one side stood the Seljuk Sultan, Alp Arslan. On the other, the Byzantine emperor himself, Romanos IV, leading a force larger and better equipped than anything the Seljuks could field. On paper, this should not have been close. But paper does not win battles. The Seljuks were a relatively recent power on this stage. A Turkic dynasty with roots in Central Asia, they had swept across Persia and Mesopotamia in the decades before Manzikert, building an empire that reached from the frontiers of India to the edge of Byzantine territory. By the time Alp Arslan turned his attention west, the Seljuks already held Baghdad in all but name, ruling as protectors of the Abbasid Caliphate. Alp Arslan's own name, meaning heroic lion in Turkic, reflected his standing among the Seljuk military elite before he ever took the field at Manzikert. He was the nephew of Tughril Beg, the dynasty's founder, who had first established Seljuk rule over Baghdad roughly 2 decades earlier. The Byzantine army marching to meet him was itself a patchwork. Alongside native Byzantine soldiers rode Norman mercenaries from Western Europe, Pecheneg horsemen from the steppes north of the Black Sea, and Armenian troops drawn from the empire's eastern provinces. It was a force built from many peoples, held together more by pay than by shared loyalty. As the fighting unfolded, cracks began to appear within the Byzantine ranks. Coordination broke down. Communication failed. And in the middle of the battle, several of Romanos's own commanders turned away, some say through betrayal, others through simple confusion in the chaos of combat. The Seljuk cavalry moved fast, striking where the Byzantine lines had weakened. By the end of the day, the outcome was undeniable. Emperor Romanos IV, ruler of one of the most powerful empires in the world, was captured on the battlefield. What happened next surprised many observers at the time. Alp Arslan did not execute his prisoner. By most accounts, the Sultan treated the captured emperor with a measure of respect, and the two men negotiated terms for his release, including a ransom and the promise of peace between their two empires. It made little difference. By the time Romanos made his way back toward Constantinople, his political rivals had already moved against him. He was deposed, blinded in the harsh Byzantine custom reserved for disgraced rulers, and died soon afterward. The peace he had negotiated with Alp Arslan died with him. News of the defeat spread through the Byzantine world like a shockwave. This was not a border skirmish. This was the empire's main field army, broken in a single afternoon. With no emperor left to enforce the treaty and no unified army left to guard the frontier, Byzantium slid into a prolonged succession crisis. Rival generals fought one another for the throne, while the eastern border they were supposed to defend stood open. In the years that followed, Turkic tribes moved into Anatolia in numbers no one could stop. Cities and territories that had belonged to Byzantium for centuries came under new rule, one region at a time. Within a decade, a new Turkic state, the Sultanate of Rum, had taken shape in central Anatolia, eventually ruling from Nicaea and later from Konya. The Byzantine heartland of Asia Minor, which had supplied the empire with soldiers, grain, and revenue for 7 centuries, was slipping away for good. The consequences reached further than Anatolia alone. Decades later, a Byzantine emperor facing continued Turkic advances appealed to Western Europe for military help, a request that helped set in motion the Council of Clermont in 1095, where Pope Urban II called for what would become the First Crusade, pulling knights from France, Germany, and Italy onto roads leading toward Jerusalem, an unintended consequence Alp Arslan could never have foreseen. Historians still call Manzikert one of the true turning points of world history, not because of what happened on that single day alone, but because of everything that followed from it. The Anatolia we know today, the land that would eventually give rise to empires and then to a modern nation, traces one of its clearest beginnings to this exact battlefield. Manzikert, as the site is known in modern Turkish, still carries the memory of that day. The battle is commemorated in the region every year, a reminder of how a single collapse on a single afternoon can redirect the course of 1,000 years. A single defeat, a single door thrown open, and a land that would never fully return to what it had been before. The Lydians, Sardis, Manisa, Turkey. Near the modern town of Salihli in Manisa province, the ruins of an ancient capital sit quietly beside the Pactolus stream, a place that once controlled more wealth than almost any city in the ancient world. This was Sardis, capital of the kingdom of Lydia. The Lydians rose to prominence in western Anatolia sometime in the early 1st millennium BCE, and by the 7th century BCE, they had built something the ancient world had never quite seen before: standardized coinage. Historians and archaeologists generally credit the Lydians with minting the first coins, made from electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver found in the waters of the Pactolus itself. Before this innovation, trade across the ancient world relied on barter or weighed precious metal. The Lydian coin changed that, introducing a standardized unit of value that could be trusted, counted, and carried, a concept that would eventually spread across the entire Mediterranean world and beyond. That wealth reached its peak under one king whose name became, quite literally, a byword for riches: Croesus. Croesus ruled Lydia in the 6th century BCE, and his reputation for wealth was so vast that it outlived his kingdom by thousands of years. The phrase "rich as Croesus" is still used today, in English and many other languages, to describe extraordinary wealth, a linguistic fossil of a king who has been dead for roughly 26 centuries. But wealth, as the story of Croesus demonstrates, does not guarantee good judgment. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, Croesus grew concerned about the rising power of Persia under Cyrus the Great, and sent envoys to consult the oracle at Delphi about whether he should go to war. The oracle's answer, as these things tend to go in ancient sources, was famously ambiguous. If Croesus attacked Persia, the oracle said, he would destroy a great empire. Before the fateful campaign, Croesus had already made himself famous at Delphi. Herodotus describes gifts of almost unimaginable extravagance sent to the sanctuary: gold and silver mixing bowls, ingots, and a solid gold lion that once sat atop a pile of gold ingots before an earlier fire damaged the temple treasury. Few rulers before or after attempted to buy divine favor on that scale. Croesus took this as a promise of victory. He attacked, and the great empire he destroyed turned out to be his own. Cyrus defeated Croesus's forces, and in 546 BCE captured Sardis itself, absorbing Lydia into the growing Persian Empire. Whether Croesus survived the conquest, and what became of him afterward, is recorded differently across ancient sources, with some accounts describing a dramatic reprieve and others a grimmer end. Historians today treat the more elaborate versions of his fate with some caution, given how much legend accumulated around his story even in antiquity. Herodotus, writing roughly a century after these events, remains the primary source for most of what is known about Lydia's final decades, his account blending documented fact with travelers' tales in a way modern historians read with both interest and care. Sardis itself did not disappear with Lydian independence. Under Persian rule, it became the western terminus of the Royal Road, a vast highway system connecting the Persian heartland to the Aegean coast, cementing the city's importance as a hub of trade and administration for centuries to come. Later, under Roman and Byzantine rule, Sardis continued to thrive, its ruins today including a well-preserved gymnasium complex, a synagogue among the largest known from the ancient world, and the remains of a great temple of Artemis, its towering columns still standing against the sky. Excavations at Sardis, carried out by archaeological teams for much of the 20th and 21st centuries, have also uncovered Lydian residential quarters and a monumental altar to the goddess Cybele, filling out the picture of daily life beyond coinage and kings. Nearby, at a burial ground known as Bin Tepe, the Thousand Mounds, Lydian kings were laid to rest beneath enormous earthen tumuli, the largest attributed to Croesus's own father Alyattes, a mound so massive it ranks among the largest burial monuments anywhere in the ancient world. Archaeologists continue to work at Sardis today, uncovering layer after layer of a city that shaped how much of the ancient and modern world thinks about money itself. Every coin in every pocket today, in some sense, traces its conceptual lineage back to this stretch of riverbank in western Anatolia, where a kingdom once turned gold-flecked water into an idea that changed how humans exchange value with each other. The river that made Sardis wealthy still runs today, quieter now, its gold long since gone, but the idea it helped produce has outlasted every empire that has come and gone since. The Phrygians, Gordian and King Midas, Ankara, Turkey. About 70 kilometers southwest of modern Ankara, near the town of Polatlı, the earthen mounds of an ancient capital rise from the Anatolian plain. This was Gordion, capital of the kingdom of Phrygia. The Phrygians settled central Anatolia sometime around the 12th century BCE, building a kingdom that would reach its height a few centuries later under a ruler whose name has echoed through mythology ever since. King Midas. In Greek mythology, Midas is best remembered for a single, catastrophic wish. Having done a favor for the god Dionysus, Midas was granted any request he desired, and asked that everything he touched turn to gold. The god granted it, and Midas soon discovered the price of getting exactly what he asked for, as his food, his drink, and eventually, in the most tragic versions of the story, even his own daughter turned to lifeless gold beneath his hands. This is, by every account, a myth, a moral fable about greed rather than a historical record. But behind the myth stood a real king. Assyrian records from the 8th century BCE refer to a ruler named Mita of Mushki, generally identified by historians as the same figure Greek sources called Midas, king of a powerful Phrygian state that Assyria treated as a serious rival in Anatolia. This Midas was real, ruled a genuinely wealthy and influential kingdom, and appears to have engaged in diplomacy and likely conflict with the great powers of his era. How a real king with documented diplomatic history became, in Greek storytelling, a figure whose touch turned the world to gold is a question historians can only partially answer. Some suggest the association with Phrygia's genuine mineral wealth and trade riches may have fed the legend over generations of retelling among neighboring cultures who admired, and perhaps envied, Phrygian prosperity. Gordion holds another famous story as well, one tied not to Midas directly, but to the dynasty he was said to belong to. According to legend, an oracle once declared that whoever could untie an impossibly complex knot binding an ox cart in Gordion would go on to rule all of Asia. The knot, tied by Midas's father Gordius according to the tradition, defeated every challenger for generations. Until Alexander the Great arrived in 333 BCE. According to the most famous version of the story, Alexander, unable to find the knot's end, simply drew his sword and cut it in half. Whether this actually happened exactly as later historians described, or was embellished over time into a cleaner story than the reality, remains debated. But the phrase, cutting the Gordian knot, meaning to solve a complicated problem through decisive action, survives in common use today, thousands of years later. Archaeology has given Gordion something myths cannot: solid, physical evidence. In 1957, archaeologists working under Rodney Young of the University of Pennsylvania Museum excavated a massive burial mound at Gordion, now known as the Midas Mound, uncovering one of the best-preserved Iron Age tombs ever found. Inside, a wooden burial chamber held an array of bronze vessels, furniture, and grave goods remarkably intact after roughly 27 centuries underground. Whether the tomb belonged to Midas himself or to his father Gordius remains debated among archaeologists, though its scale leaves little doubt it held someone of great importance to the Phrygian royal line. Later scientific analysis of residue found inside the tomb's bronze vessels revealed traces of a funerary feast, remnants of a spiced stew, and a fermented drink blending grape wine, barley beer, and honey mead, a discovery detailed enough that modern breweries have since recreated versions of the ancient beverage based on the residue analysis. Dendrochronology, the dating of wood by counting its growth rings, allowed researchers to date the tomb's timber with unusual precision, anchoring the burial firmly within the 8th century BCE. Gordion today is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, its excavated mounds and reconstructed structures offering a rare, tangible link to a kingdom that gave the ancient world both a cautionary myth about greed and a phrase still used to describe cutting through impossible problems. The Phrygians also left behind their own alphabet, adapted from Phoenician script around the same period Greek writing itself was taking shape, and surviving Phrygian inscriptions rank among the oldest alphabetic texts found anywhere in Anatolia, a reminder that this kingdom's legacy extended well beyond gold and knots into the written word itself. The gold Midas supposedly created never existed, but the kingdom behind the legend did, and its capital still sits quietly on the plain, waiting for each new generation of archaeologists to uncover a little more of what was real.